It's Dr. Nerida with a big welcome to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast. I am so excited for this conversation today. Crowd favourite, Professor Brian Nielsen from Michigan State University, who is a world-leading expert on bone and joint health, is back. This time with his wonderfully sharp grad student, Renee Harbowy. And together we discuss joint supplements for horses. Over the course of our conversation, we explore the historical lack of evidence for the effectiveness of joint supplements, despite their widespread use. We look at just how common osteoarthritis is in horses, and Dr. Brian and Renee discuss the results of their recent study looking into whether a popular joint supplement is actually effective at alleviating the symptoms associated with arthritis. We then go on to discuss what joint care should look like and the practical things you as a horse owner can do to truly look after your horse's joints. Because there was so much to talk about, we ended up chatting for about 2 hours. So to save dumping all of that information on you at once, we have divided this into a 2-part podcast series on joints. Ready to listen to part 1? Let's go. Hello, and gosh, I am so excited to welcome you to the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast today because we have back in the saddle for his second Happy Horse podcast, Professor Brian Nielsen. Welcome back, Brian.
There it is. So great to be with you as always. It makes my day to be with you.
Oh, thank you. It's so good to have you back. And joining you today is your wonderful grad student, Renee Harbowy. Welcome, Renee. It's so good to have you with us.
Thank you. I'm excited.
So we are here today to discuss joint supplements and some recent research that you guys have just published at the ESS conference in the USA. And I was pondering this morning, well, how are we going to open up this podcast? And it occurred to me, Brian, that my very, very first contact with you ever was when I emailed you just completely out of the blue. I'd never met you, never spoken to you. And I emailed you completely out of the blue, asking you a question about a supplement that I'd come across. It was a European supplement being sold in Australia, though. And it had basically a pinch of sodium zeolite A in it. And so me being curious, went, I wonder what that stuff does. Found your research, or I may have already been aware of your research on sodium zeolite A, and when supplemented, it actually did have a positive effect on bone health in young racehorses. But when I looked at your research paper and I looked at the amount of sodium zeolite A in this supplement, I'm thinking, is it actually going to make any difference? And I emailed you to ask you the question because I was young and I was very unsure as a nutritionist back then. And the resounding answer came back saying, absolutely not. The amount that is used in that supplement won't make any difference. So it's kind of it's an appropriate introduction from me to you, and then we've circled all the way around, gotten to know each other quite well over the years, and here we are to talk about your research on joint supplements.
What's interesting is I actually remember that email because that was more than a year or two ago, and it started this relationship, and you've become a very dear friend, and we've traveled to many parts of the world together, and look forward to more of those travels as we help horses across the world and their owners. And I will state that, there are so many supplements out there that may not do what they claim to do. And that's actually very frustrating for me. My job here at Michigan State University, I've always viewed it, my research end of it, as one, we want to help the horses first, and then to help the horse owners. And sometimes that help is simply keeping money in your pocket. If something doesn't work, don't waste your money on it. Try something else, or, just realize you're wasting money. So, and again, it's neat when things actually do make a difference. A lot of the things don't. And like you used as an example, sometimes even if something works, if it's a different form of it or not the right amount that's in there, then you're still wasting your money. So, and I find that sad. I always said I wish I had no ethics because I would sell horse supplements. I make a lot of money, but a lot more than a university professor, but
And like you said, there is a lot of supplements, and I've formulated a lot of them over the years that do amazing things for horses. So when you use the right ingredients and the right amounts for the right horses, then you can actually have a really positive impact on horse health. Wrong ingredients, wrong amounts, wrong horses, then you're not necessarily going to do harm, but you other than to the owner's wallet, but you're not necessarily going to do any good. But Brian, just really quickly for people who haven't come across you before, can you give us like the 2-minute summary of your background in bone and joint research and I guess how you ended up here?
Yeah. So I actually got started as an exercise rider, galloping racehorses and starting them under saddle back in 1989. That's again a year or two ago. And of course, with the racehorses, injuries are always a major concern that you are worried about. The whole issue over joints probably started in 1990, riding for a trainer. The owner of this one horse in particular used to lunge that horse to get the horse into shape, and she had horrible joints. Actually, Renee currently is doing some work with corticosteroids, and that trainer, he actually injected her ankle. Suddenly, she won, set parimutuel history, paid $152.40 for a $2 bet. That taught me that A, corticosteroids can reduce inflammation, hide pain, doesn't heal the joint. We raced her one more time. She finished second. The trainer said, that's enough. We're going to put her into retirement. That was the appropriate thing. But any way to help the joints actually heal would be a wonderful thing. I also am a runner. And like my first marathon that I was training for back in 1999, I believe, was having some joint problems because running 26.2 miles is stupid. Um, it tells you a lot about the type of person I am. Uh, but the deal is, we had started to do some work with glucosamine, chondroitin sulfate at that time in the late 90s. And at that point, I was still of the opinion, hey, this stuff might work. Everybody's talking about it. And so we were doing some horse research. And the fun little story about it is I go to the pharmacy to buy some glucosamine for myself. Um, and the pharmacist said, oh, and a lot of my clients also have had good results with shark cartilage. And I told the pharmacist, well, I believe in the placebo effect also. So I don't think she caught that. I tried the glucosamine, whatever, I saw no difference. Stopping running those long distances and actually changing my shoes out because they were worn out tended to have a little bit more. So maybe that was the first little bit of doubt that I had because I didn't see any difference with myself. But also, oftentimes when people have a problem, they change up multiple things all at the same time. And then if something positive happens, like you quit running those long distance, you change your shoes or whatever, you're taking glucosamine, you want to give credit to the thing you are spending money on.
Mm.
So that's what inspired my interest in this whole topic.
Oh, awesome. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And yes, running marathons is crazy. I've actually said to my family and my partner, if I ever come home and say I want to run a marathon, please check me in for some sort of mental assessment because it will not be something that I ever do.
Everybody I have run with Nerida, she's actually a very good runner. So don't let her fool you on that. And
No.
marathons are so fun. The training form sucks, but they are very fun. So anyway,
that's
you
just
could
confirmation.
absolutely do it. So yeah.
Confirmation that you're crazy. And Renee, what drew you into researching equine lameness? Like, have you got a background in horses? Because I've only just met you this morning. So can you just give us a little bit of your background as well?
Yeah. So, in terms of like graduate school broadly, I kind of walked into a bachelor's knowing that I was going to do some form of like graduate level education. What that says about my personality, I'm not too certain. But at first, I was set out on vet school, and then the more I got involved with research throughout my bachelor's degree, I just really fell in love with it and realized graduate school was going to be much better aligned with my goals than veterinary school may have been. And when I was originally like reaching out to faculty looking to apply places, I kept my horizons very open. I think there were very few fields that I was like, you guys can keep that one. But really anything that was kind of like exercise, physiology, nutrition related, I was very open to. And then interestingly enough, the two programs that I ended up sort of needing to choose between both had upcoming projects that had aspects of joint health. I actually was going to go to the other program instead of Michigan State. But fate works in mysterious ways, and I've ended up at MSU, and it's been absolutely perfect, and I think the research we're doing is so much fun. And even though I kind of had a very open approach to what I was willing to study in graduate school, I think I was always very interested in joint health, and I think things couldn't have worked out better than they have. The ranch that I'm assuming we're going to talk about later, I spent a lot of time working at, and most of those horses are on to second and third careers. Some just had their careers cut short, whether that's due to an injury or early onset arthritis. But I really got my start in the horse world working with like geriatric animals. And it's kind of hard to find an old horse that's not lame or arthritic. And so I think those horses, are always going to have a very I'm going to have a very soft spot for that ranch and them always. And so I really sometimes feel like this area of work too, is often like, um, in homage to all the hours those horses have put in, not only to like my own training to get me to be, like the horseman I am today, but the thousands of other lives they have touched. And it's really cool to be part of things that I can imagine, hopefully, can make the difference for plenty of horses, in the future that maybe they won't end up quite so, gimpy, perhaps,
Mm,
in their
mm.
geriatric years.
Oh, that's
But
so
yeah.
that's so beautiful. I know you know exactly what you mean. We have a very old mare. We don't quite know how old she is, but when we got her, she was in somewhere in her early to mid 30s. And our vet assessed her and he said, "Oh, you might get 6 months out of her because her joints are so bad." And that was 4 years ago.
Yeah. Yeah.
But she's so broken and so lame. So it would be lovely to know that, in future there might be something that we can do for these horses. And I look at her like I have no idea what her history is, and I look at her and think you've just done so many hours for probably a number of people in your lifetime, and you just deserve to be looked after and have a happy retirement. Yeah. Oh, so
Yes, exactly.
yeah, they're just beautiful animals, and it's a big part of why we do what we do, and it's also why I call this the Happy Horse Nutrition Podcast, because my inner scientist didn't like the name and having happy, because it's like, oh man, it's making fun of the science that is nutrition. And then I realized, like talking to horse people, how often I say, we just want our horses to be happy. And I'm like, oh wow, it really is something that we do aspire to. So this fits in beautifully with all of that, which is great. So Brian, like we did with our bone health podcast, let's start with a common misconception. What is the biggest misunderstanding horse owners have about joint supplements?
I would say that a lot of people firmly believe that they work and that
Mm,
there's all this science and evidence and proof that they work. And the thing is there really isn't evidence or proof that they work. If it's okay with you, I'll go back and give you a little history regarding some of the research I did, that I addressed back in the early
mm,
90s. One of my colleagues, he did a lot of work for one of these companies, but it was a lot of cell culture work. You take some cartilage cells, you grow them, you add some stuff to it. And in cell cultures, there's a lot of things that change when you add some of these ingredients, glucosamine, chondroitin sulfate, whatever. And so I've had some grad students who've done some of that type of work, and we have papers published in it. And back in the early 90s, or I'm sorry, the late 90s or early 2000s, you're starting to put pieces of the puzzle together. And again, there's reasons why it might work. But I'll also go back to I was giving a talk, I think it was 2005 or so. American Association of Equine Practitioners, they had a special meeting called Focus on Joints. I was asked to speak there on some stuff. A colleague was asked to speak about some of this glucosamine, chondroitin sulfate type stuff. Um, the moderator for his session asked him when he was done, can you identify a good study in horses that actually shows it works? And my colleague had to say no. By the way, the moderator for that was Dr. Wayne McElraith, who,
Mm.
one of the world's leading orthopedic surgeons for horses. All the great horses here in the U.S. that need that type of surgery done. He's been the man for many, many years. But then he turned to the audience, which is all pretty much equine practitioners, equine vets, and he says, "How many of you are recommending this to your patients?" And probably 95% of the people raised their hands. And he said, I've been thinking of writing a position paper regarding if it's ethical that we recommend something where there is no proof that it actually works. Because just because something works in a cell culture doesn't mean it works in the living animal. I'd actually contacted the company that produced this product to see if they would at least just give us the product to test. We had 40 horses lined up. We were going to 20 on, 20 on a placebo, and they wouldn't do that, which, by the way, is a smart business approach for them. There really isn't anything to gain by doing the research because if you do the research and it shows it doesn't work, that's not good.
Mm.
But I will also throw out if you actually do the research and shows that it works, suddenly is it now going to be called a drug? Do you now have another level of regulation you have to deal with? So I get it, but that always bothered me a little bit. But more so, it bothers me there is no good research that I can report to somebody who says, see, this shows that works. So
Mm.
it's been 20 years in the waiting to finally go ahead and get this. And I'm going to give a shout out to the Michigan Alliance for Animal Agriculture, who is willing to fund it. So it's a state agency um, that they have, as we say, no skin in the game. In other
Mm.
words, they don't care what the results are. They just want to know the truth. And that's a big benefit because when you have somebody who's selling the supplement, you know how they want the results to turn out. And actually, a lot of scientists, we love to think science is pure. It is not at all. Oftentimes, the way you advance in your career is, well, finding exciting things or going ahead and getting more research dollars. And the way to get research dollars from a company is proving their product works instead of finding out whether it does work or not. So, all of those factors are what kind of got me excited about doing this work.
And I'm so glad and grateful to the funding body because it's work that needed doing, and it's not easy to get funding for research like this. So yeah, thank you for giving them a shout out because they definitely deserve it. So Renee,
And actually, wait, can I stop while we're giving shout outs?
Mhm.
Renee mentioned this ranch, and I'll let her also give another shout out because they can't get enough shout outs. But the fact that they embraced us, part of it is I think Renee was a counselor there for 7 years prior. But Black River Farm and Ranch, if I have the name right, Croswell, Michigan, they allowed us to use their horses, evaluate them all, pick out 40 that worked best for this, and for nothing.
Yeah.
Research is expensive, and oftentimes you'd be charged per diems, meaning how much you have to pay per day to use the horses. And they didn't charge us a thing. I love them.
Yeah.
Anyway, I'll let Renee shout out a little bit to them too, but I figured I can't brag on them enough.
Yeah, we'll definitely talk about them some more. So we were chatting off air, Renee, and because you and I've only just met today, and just saying that I've been working as a professional equine nutritionist now for 25 years, not quite as long as you've been around, Brian, but getting up there, and I formulated lots of feeds and lots of supplements in that time, and I've been asked many, many times to formulate joint supplements. And as I was saying to you, I've never done one because I didn't have a scientific basis from which to formulate one. I didn't know how to formulate one because I couldn't tell what I should put in it, what the dose rate should be. So I've always said no. So I actually don't know a lot about this space of osteoarthritis because I've never worked in it. And reading some of the information that you have sent leading up to this podcast, it actually shocked me how common osteoarthritis is. So can you just walk us through how common it is and why it's something that horse owners are so, I guess, passionate about, scared of, worried about for their horses?
Yeah, absolutely. It's so our statistics that we use, which may or may not need some updating, is that by age 15, about 50% of horses are going to have osteoarthritis, and that number increases to about 90% by the time that they reach 20 years of age.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't necessarily mean debilitating arthritis, but there are arthritic changes in the joint.
Mm-hmm.
And it's kind of become so commonplace that I think a lot of people just feel that it's inevitable. And it's kind of thought as just wear and tear that happens over time. And that's what happens. Joints break down and horses get arthritis. And
Mm,
lovely to work with animals, that we keep around so long that we can get to watch them grow old. I
mm,
love that. Um, but as much as people may make a living on their horses, horses are absolutely also a companion for a lot of people.
mhm,
And I have yet to meet anybody who finds any form of joy in watching their horses grow old.
mm,
And I think that is a huge aspect as to why there's so much desire for a treatment or a solution, because we really do see incidence rates where it feels like no matter what, your horse is going to get arthritis. And I think anything that offers people a little bit of hope, they may be willing to try to sort of fight off that feeling of
mm,
inevitability.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, it makes so much sense because we do. We just want to look after them and have them as happy
Yeah.
as possible. And it's so easy to believe that something is going to help if you want to.
Yes,
And it's also
absolutely.
easy to find evidence that it will help if you want to as well, which is just one of those interesting quirks of our human brain. So let's talk about joint supplements because that's the whole topic of this conversation. So can you just fill us in, Renee, what are the most common active ingredients in joint supplements, and what are each of those ingredients supposed to do?
Yeah, that is a good question. Most commonly, what you would probably see in almost anything that you're going to pick up off of the shelf is some form of glucosamine with chondroitin sulfate, and then more often than not, you're also going to see MSM thrown in there. And what they do depends on what decade of research you would like to pull from, which is
Oh,
really
right.
interesting.
Yeah.
Um, so our more like earlier papers that you might look at, um, it seems like there was kind of a thought process that perhaps glucosamine and the chondroitin sulfate sort of served as building blocks to support the actual matrix of the cartilage. So they actually had some form of structure that they were offering the joint actual support.
Mm-hmm.
And nowadays, we see papers leaning a little more towards them having regulatory effects and perhaps sort of intervening in certain pathways that could be affecting transcription, and them more having these positive effects as a kind of downstream effect of them being absorbed into the animal.
Mm.
So it's interesting to see how that has changed over time. And then we know MSM to be anti-inflammatory, and that's kind of its main role. And it just sort of seems to get tossed in with everything. You'll
Yeah.
see, and then there's always going to be a couple of like side ingredients that are like listed as active that vary between products that make them distinct from one another.
Mm-hmm.
But almost always there is like some form of purported anti-inflammatory effect associated with these active ingredients, which
Mm-hmm.
is, yeah, very interesting as to whether or not they're functioning almost like an NSAID. I mean, they're not a drug, but if they're mimicking an NSAID or if they're actually changing the structure of the tissue of the joint, or um, the research is a bit undecided, it seems, still,
Mm.
as to what they might be doing.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And what does so prior to your paper, which we'll talk about very soon, what does the science up until now say about the effectiveness in horses for things like the glucosamine and the chondroitin sulfate? That might be a bit of a loaded question, but you can.
Well, we know that it can be absorbed by the horse. That's a good place to start.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there isn't a ton of I haven't come across a ton of great literature documenting how much from it getting put into a feed bowl gets into the joint, but if it's having systemic regulatory effects, does it need to reach the joint is also a complete separate question.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a little bit of a blurry line there. Again, depending on what decade we would like to select of our research,
Mm-hmm.
is an important aspect there. And but in horses, when we feed these joint supplements, um, we really don't see that they have a overwhelming effect, it seems. And we kind of say that this area of research is in a pre-paradigm state, which I'm quoting somebody else with this, but um, there's not really a established protocol, like you mentioned, for like how much of each thing do we need to
Mm.
feed. If you almost every paper you look at, we feed according to label directions, which we did in our study as well. That's kind of the standard. I haven't come across the paper that has established the label directions. I don't think
Mm.
it's out there. So that is like a huge criticism for like the entire body of work and something
Mm.
that we definitely like need established. And then in terms of like how long we feed, every study is a little bit different. So we don't really have a great set of standards established for how we want to evaluate the efficacy of these products. But in the studies that do, you'll sometimes see like a few parameters that look like they may have improved. Um, and kind of like we talked about, a lot of people I think feel really hopeful with these things and
Mm.
kind of want to hold on to those few items that maybe look like they could have gotten better.
Mhm.
But there's yet to be anything that I think anybody could conclude as being definitive evidence.
Mm. Mm. And Brian, do you have anything to add to that? Like the fact that there is such a big gap between owner confidence in these supplements and the actual evidence for them, because we as horse owners spend billions apparently every year on these supplements, and yet there's
Yeah,
so little evidence that they. Have you got anything to add just on that?
yeah, it's pretty ridiculous. But I'll give you a couple thoughts. So there was a study published in 1997 by Hansen and colleagues that they went ahead and they gave one of these supplements, and then they evaluated the horse's stride length over, I don't recall how many weeks. And that gets thrown around all the time. And in fact, one of the
Mm.
companies, they highly cite that. The problem is there was no control group. So basically, if you take some horses and you evaluate their stride length over a period of time, it's going to change. I mean, if you're
Mm-mm.
nothing stays the same, that's why you always have to have a control group. So that got the party started, we'll
Mm.
say, in terms
Mhm.
of people believing that it works, and it's often thrown out in commercials and advertisements. But the problem is, horse owners love their horses. They want to make them happy horses.
Mm.
And in reality, we are so desperate to try something because is there a cure for osteoarthritis? As a dear friend of mine, a colleague, shout out Dr. Amy Kolbath. She used to be at Michigan State. She's now at Cornell University, but she made a comment about whoever actually comes up with a cure for this is going to be a very wealthy individual because people are so desperate. So, and the problem even with arthritis, osteoarthritis, or any type of injury is it gets worse, it gets better, it changes constantly. So if you're giving it and your animal improves a little bit, you chalk it up to that. I've
Mm.
talked to many individuals who say, well, it works for my horse. Okay, that's great. Why in a study with lots of animals in a control group, you don't see those same results? Well, it's because individuals do just change. As a runner, there's times I'm crippled, there's times I'm not crippled. I don't take anything.
Mm.
It changes. Um,
Mm.
so it's desperation because we care about our animals, and that's a good thing. Um, so I don't blame them for trying. Um, and I also don't blame the companies for not doing the research because people
Mm.
are buying it regardless. But that makes me sad because I want to help out horse owners as much as I want to help out horses. So it's always important to know the truth.
Mhm. And yeah, this is where this your research, Renee and Brian, is just so, I love it because it's putting some beautiful research into this space where there hasn't been a lot of research. There hasn't been a lot of research, period, but there also hasn't been a lot of really well controlled research. And for anyone, just to circle back a little bit to that original study, Brian, for anyone who's not worked in this space of research, you really can't do research without a control.
Right.
Period.
Not good, not good
Because-
research.
No, and because the control is the group of animals that are not treated with what you're trying to show either has a positive or a negative effect. So if you don't have that group in your study, it's really hard to tell whether any change you see is because of the weather or the change in pasture or there is no way of I guess filtering out all of the other things that could be having an effect on the animal that you're studying. Whereas if you've got a control group that is not being treated and are in the same environmental conditions and same handling and all of those things, and that's sort of how that is how you tell whether what you're studying is actually having an effect. So a research study without a control is next to useless, I'm going to say.
Exactly. And you hit on it. We talk about all these confounding factors, all these other things that could influence the results. And unless you have the control group, and also it's really important. I think Renee may, she can probably give a better description of the importance of blinding it to make certain, because people, if you're doing the research, you want something exciting. You want to find some stuff. So it's very handy to make certain that hardly anybody knows what the treatments really are. And that's what makes it a really good control. Because otherwise, we're humans. We have our beliefs, our tendencies, and we may bias things if we really want to find something positive.
And it's just part of our human psychology that is near impossible to override.
Yes.
Even if you think that you're overriding it, it's near impossible. There's a really cool book written by Annie Duke called Thinking in Bets. It's an awesome read, and it's a lot about this psychology around how this cognitive bias type psychology, and it's a cool book. She's was a world champion poker player.
Well, Nerida, I think this would be a great book for any horse person. Thinking in bits and bridles.
Bets.
But
Bet. In bets.
Oh, sorry.
BETS. This is the issue with my Australian accent. So anyway, moving right along. So Renee, can you just give us a little bit of a background? Just I'm intrigued to know about Black River Farm and Ranch, and give us a little bit of a background about them, and also just walk us through how you selected the horses that were going to be used in your study.
Okay, absolutely. So, Black River Farm and Ranch is in Croswell, Michigan, and it is an all-girls summer camp.
Oh.
And what's a bit unique about it is that it is completely dedicated to essentially what is equine education. The campers spend the whole morning, they spend half of it getting a riding lesson,
Mhm.
and that, they do horse talk sessions where they learn about feeding and grooming and horse care, breeds, everything under the sun. So it's more than like an average summer camp, like with horses, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And another unique thing is that these horses are owned and lived on this property, compared to some other camps that very often like lease horses for the summer. So we have a very consistent population that are always managed
Mhm.
by this ranch. Some of the horses have been there longer than I have been alive, which is super cool. And then in terms of actually going ahead and selecting the horses is this herd, I don't know if I said it or not yet. It's about 80 horses. It's a pretty big group, larger than what you might be able to find on other places, and they're essentially just like completely housed on pasture.
Mhm.
So when we go to Black River and we go to start a study, we have a whole list of horses, and then kind of from the get-go, we can sit down with the staff, and there's always going to be some horses that can't be included, and you know that right from the start, right?
Mhm.
So whether or not they have to be on particular medication, or we know they have a history of injection, or they're experiencing an acute lameness, or we know they have a lameness that is due to something else other than what is
Mm.
suspected to be arthritis. So
Mhm.
if a horse is navicular, or we know they have a history of laminitis, for example, and like they've never been quite the same, those are horses that we wouldn't want to include. So then kind of once we have our list of possibilities, what we did for this study is for horses to be selected, they needed to have an AAP lameness grade between 2 and 4. So we're talking about horses that are lame at the trot under some circumstances, and then horses that their lameness may be noticeable at the walk. Um, and some people hear that and they say, "How could you be using this horse in a summer camp situation?" Not all of them are necessarily used for riding. Some that are like on the more crippled side. This again is like a children's summer camp, so
Mm.
we have, 5 and 6-year-olds that need a really safe ride to just convince them to get onto a horse sometimes. So again, this is they live a very pampered lifestyle. They're not doing
Mm.
anything crazy just to,
Mhm.
for everyone
These
to be
horses are
fair.
so loved. They are loved
Yeah.
more than any other horses I have ever
Yeah.
seen. It's
And
very
and in
cute.
my experience too, when they're like the mare that I mentioned, old Breezy that we have, she looks so happy. I mean, we don't ride her now because she really is beyond the point of being able to be ridden. But when my son was riding her, when she was riding, ears forward, eyes bright, like loved it, absolutely loved it. And I feel sorry for her now that she can't be a part of that anymore because she did. You could see it on her face that she loved being ridden, even though, when we had her, she would have been, gosh, I don't know what lameness score, but she was pretty old and slow, but she was perfect for, like you say, for a 5 or 6 year old, because all they need to do is just poke around and be quiet and safe. So yeah, I absolutely get it. Okay, so we picked out, how many horses did you have in the study?
40 total. So, once we kick out ones that can't be included at all, perhaps we have a list of about 60 or 70, and then we go through and see, you know, who meets what lameness grade. So that was done by the veterinarian that was a part of our team. We essentially made a big horse parade with the research team and the staff at the camp, and, trotted 60 horses up and down this barn alleyway the whole day. And that was a lot of fun. And then we basically just look at her notes, see who meets that initial inclusion criteria, and then we go through the horses and kind of we striate them by how much they weigh, their body condition score, and then what we anticipated their workload to be for that
Mm-hmm.
summer.
Mm-hmm.
So that way each group is as identical as we can make it. So
Mm.
um, for each who gets the joint supplement, who gets the placebo, it's not that one group was really old doing no work and they're thin, and the other group is young and fat and like having the time of their life out there in the riding
Mm-mm.
range, right? It's definitely matched to make sure those groups are as evenly distributed as possible. So some younger horses, some middle of the road, some older, and making sure those body condition scores and everything are even. So that's kinda how we account for the differences in those horses, and then, how we picked them out. So the initial selection is really just based on their subjective lameness grade. And then, kinda like we were discussing before we began recording, is we can then account for their baseline values in our
Mm.
statistical models later on for the factors that we, uh, weren't able to striate the horses by. Just because there's always gonna be some things that on those initial assessments, you have to work with what you can. You can't necessarily get every piece of data in 12 hours and look at all of it and make those groups perfect. So,
Mm.
a practical assessment, but we do our best to keep everything as equal as possible.
Mhm. Do you have anything to add to that, Brian?
I'll tell you what, it just Renee seems to capture all this. I am so blessed to be working with her, and yeah, that's my way of saying she nailed it. So
Yeah,
yeah.
no, you do. You explain things beautifully, Renee. Thank you. Okay, so we've got our two groups of 20 horses now, and
Mhm.
as similar to one another as they can be, because you've gone through that selection process. And then there's the two treatments. So there was the joint supplement and then a placebo. So placebo being, it was literally, can we say what it was?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I don't see why not. We used bleached all-purpose flour, and then it just got a little bit of color added to it. Which actually kind of, I guess, ties in. Hopefully, I'm not like stealing your thunder here, but with how we blinded all of those treatments between our supplement and our placebo, we assigned each of those two colors. So it kind of seemed like we had four treatments.
I remember you saying this to me, Brian, and I did have it scribbled down here, like 4 treatments with a question mark, because I remember you said that. So, and that was a part of the blinding. So the people who fed the horses didn't know what was what, and the veterinarian who was assessing the horses didn't know what was what, and they believed that there was 4 treatments. Is that correct?
Yes, that
Yeah.
was everybody's impression. So, and to make these things appear distinct from one another, we essentially took some cornstarch, hydrated it, and then added some like food safe dye and a little bit of like oil that had like a bit of a smell to it,
Mm-hmm.
and then mixed that, baked it down so it created this like scented color concentrate for us.
Mm-hmm.
And then we added that into like each of those treatments. So they each had a little bit of a different color. They each smelled a little bit different. And then we left one of our joint supplements alone because it kind of already has its own color and its own scent. But this way, when our staff went through open buckets to go feed in the morning, there was no like nobody could open a bucket and then immediately be like, "Oh, I know exactly what
The
that is."
same, yeah.
And you wouldn't guess that something that's like green and smells like apples and then another red pinkish thing that smells like peppermint would be the exact same thing. So that worked out pretty well for us.
Very good.
We're
And then
just a bit on the tricky side.
I love it. I love it, and I can see exactly why he did it, because it's so easy to bias studies like this if you're wanting to, and it doesn't even have to be a conscious thought. I want to prove that. I mean, in your case, it could have been I want to prove that joint supplements don't work, and even if you don't consciously think that, there can be that human bias that creeps in. So putting 4, that's gold. I love it. Putting 4 supplements in.
And I got to throw in what was really neat for us on this study is we didn't care at all what the results were.
Yeah.
If the supplement works, great. We could tell horse owners,
Yeah.
this actually works.
Yeah.
If it doesn't work, we can say, you know what? We didn't find it. I guess I would save my money. So oftentimes with research, one way or the other is a little more exciting. For us, it really didn't matter. We just want the truth.
Yeah, no, it's such a good way to put it. It's an important distinction too. So immediately it comes to mind, how did you make sure, so this would be one challenge, how did you make sure that the supplement went to the right horse every day? And what were the other challenges of running a study in a place like this where you've got 80 horses and kids everywhere and all sorts of people feeding? How did you control
Yeah.
everything?
So thankfully, so I guess to almost like work through those questions backwards, um, this camp has been open since 1962, and
Oh,
they have
wow.
things down to a science. So typically the entire summer, so I was a program director there as well, and if they manage things the same way they were managed while I was there, typically you have the same people feeding the entire summer because once you teach somebody a feed list for 80 horses, you don't want to teach somebody else. It's like, especially again, geriatric animals, a lot of meds. It's wonderful to have 2 people that just know it inside and out.
Yeah, wow.
And then these horses are brought in at 8 in the morning, and from their pasture, they're, rounded up on a 4-wheeler. They come in through a chute, and then they are stand on their assigned cross ties. So that happens at 8 a.m. By 8:30, everything is fed. It is a quick turnaround. And so it's really nailed down that whole system. Another great thing is that being a children's summer camp, they have a lot of duct tape. And so with
Oh,
the
wait, my brain has just gone to the kids. Right, you've misbehaved. You've duct taped it in the corner.
We have an entire we have an entire barn dedicated to arts and crafts.
Uh,
Um, they
uh.
love to make duct tape flower pens and wallets and all of this stuff. And so we're very passionate too about our color coding. And so we're able
Uh,
to use the duct tape from their craft barn,
yes.
to then match the color coding of the buckets because each horse also has their own individual bucket. And then on the horse's stall is also a tag that says research. So everybody knows the research animal that also matches the color code.
Yep.
So the staff in the feed room have a feed list with a color. They scoop out of the correct colored bucket into the horse whose duct tape has to match the bucket that just got scooped out of.
Yep.
It gets handed to a camper, and the camper, before they put that feed into a horse's bucket, needs to make sure that the duct tape on the bucket matches the color of the tag on the stall.
Mhm.
Which, granted, I guess you never know if somebody doesn't tell you something, which is a horrific
Mm.
thought. But, we control those things as tightly as we can, and I have complete faith in the staff there, and the kids are incredibly competent, and it's hard to get those things. It would be kinda hard to get it messed up at that point, but yeah, we really kinda did as much as we could to make sure there was no room for anybody to get confused anywhere along the line, and then
Mhm.
the staff also went back through and checked that everybody, ate their food when they needed to. In the beginning, there was, I think, like, 2 horses that were like, "Oh, this smells a little different than what I'm used to." By the time they came back from their riding lesson, they were, like, more than happy to, like, finish their leftovers, and so there
Mm.
was really no problem with horses, like, consuming what we up to.
Yeah, it's yeah. I mean, that's well done getting it set up like that because it's not easy. Like I know with the research that I've done, and they're smaller. I've never done one with 40 horses, and I think the most we had was 16. Although I did do in a racing stable once, we had a lot more horses than that, and it was a lot of color coding. But I remember just thinking, I have no idea whether everything's been fed. It used to keep me awake at night. But now there was a second part of this research study where you use sheep, but I'm going to leave that for now. We'll come back to it because I want to jump to now what you found in these horses. So I guess just give us the high level, like what you did. So we've got 20 horses. They're being fed 4 treatments, which is actually 2 treatments. And can you talk us through now what you measured and then what you found?
Yeah, so these horses, so they're fed their supplement for 6 weeks, which, I already harped on this, but that's what the label says to do, and so that's what we did,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
So we went out every 2 weeks out of that 6 weeks, so we have our day 0 and then 2, 4, and 6, and so when we go out, we measured the horse's stride length. We did a subjective flexion test, which is gonna be what any horse owner thinks of when the vet comes out for a lameness exam.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also looked at these horses' gait symmetry or like their objective lameness. So that's using a lameness locator system. So
Mm-hmm.
there's these nice sensors that get placed on the horse's poll. So they wear a cute little hat. And then on the right pastern, they have a sensor, and then on the hips. And it's essentially performed just like your regular lameness exam, except these sensors are able to like collect and transmit like actual
Mm.
numerical data compared to a veterinarian just watching and perceiving how they feel the horses move.
Mhm.
We also took blood samples, weight, body condition score, but the stride length, subjective flexion tests, and our gait symmetry were kind of our like 3 main parameters that we were going to look at.
Mhm.
And generally what we saw with kind of what we've talked about previously is that these things did change over time. So we saw that stride length at the walk and the trot. We saw some differences across days. Similarly with our subjective flexion tests at our week 4 time point, they seemed like maybe they were a little more sore compared to the other weeks.
Mm.
And then similarly with our objective data, we had a couple day effects that just showed it was changing over time. And so, yeah, that really just kind of reiterates this idea that lameness is not always going to stay constant.
Mm.
Arthritis does not go away, but just like people, horses maybe have good days and bad days. So there's a lot of things that go into that. We did have a treatment by day interaction, which sounds really, really exciting. Except it was at our week 2 time point, and it
Mhm.
looks like the horses, after 2 weeks of supplementation, are at their 2-week time point because it didn't carry on through the rest of our, data collection dates.
Mhm.
We're actually more lame in the hind limb than the horses that received the placebo.
Mm.
But again, this really just shows that these things are probably variable, and, when we're looking at multiple parameters across multiple dates, we
Mhm.
can always find something by chance, um, and it doesn't necessarily mean that that data is incorrect or wrong. That is what the data says.
Mm.
Look at the whole picture, which I think is really the most important piece of this. uh, that one data point doesn't mean that a supplement actually made them more lame or that the placebo actually is, magical and we need to start investigating flour. Um, it really just tells us that, yep, like
Think.
happened that on that one day, at that one time, on that
Yeah.
one leg,
Yeah, yeah.
somebody was probably a bit sore and
And were they in work at they were being ridden at the time, these horses? Like, that was
yeah.
during kids' camp. So there could have been fluctuations in the amount of work that they did and they, were
Mhm.
feeling, but all of the horses were moving through the same
Yeah. And what's
process.
interesting too is like the changes that we saw like in stride length at the walk, and we looked at the trot and then these other day effects and our other parameters. It wasn't like, oh, something happened at week 2 because everything at our week 2 time point, they each kind of like fluctuated on their own, which really
Mhm.
just like emphasizes that it's probably natural changes that we're seeing.
Mhm.
We went back and looked at the calendar, and there's really nothing obvious in any particular sets of dates that would indicate something happened, uh,
Mm.
other than just the horses like living life.
Mhm. Mhm. So the parameters changed over time. Did they improve over time for both groups, or did they? What were the changes that you did see over time?
Yeah, so I believe it was at our week 4 time point. The horses looked they had the longest stride length at the trot. But that was also the time point at which we saw, like, the most indication of them being lame with our subjective flexion tests.
Mm.
But then they were, like, back to where they started by week 6, and then I think similarly for their stride length at the walk, it pretty much remained the same, and then it, was a little lower by week 6, like, pretty these were very minor changes, which I think is another good thing to emphasize. It wasn't like, oh, trot stride length really dropped off or, at the walk, these horses got it's just kind of like a true fluctuation over time, but, when we talk about things like stride length, which is gonna be partially dictated by, like, the conformation of the horse and
Mm.
how
Mhm.
that horse moves, um, you get standard errors that are really itty bitty. And
Mhm.
so when something changes, it does make it easier to detect that something changed because the data is much more uniform and there's
Mhm.
not all of this noise surrounding it.
Mm.
Which kinda, like, leads into that, like, point of, yes, something changed, and it is a statistically significant difference, but it doesn't necessarily mean that that change was impactful enough to actually mean something when you, like, take all the data and look at it together as a big picture.
Yeah, yeah, and the fact that it changed, like the parameters changed over time, just it highlights again the importance of a control.
Yeah.
Because if you well, what would you, Brian? What would you interpreted with this study if you didn't have a control?
Oh, that's it. I mean, without the control, you might say, "Oh, yeah, look, things are changing." And again, what was maybe the most useful finding, and when I say useful, I have that in quotation marks, is the fact that there was this slight day by treatment difference where it looked like the placebo had a better result. I absolutely do not believe flour made any difference on there, but it just emphasizes without that control, you know, these changes, things change over time. Now, let's also think about it could have been the opposite, where you might have had at a point or two where the treatment might have actually appeared a little bit better. And this is where we get into a problem with researchers is often they highlight one little thing when they've measured 20 or 30 things. And they go really hard on that. Look, it changed this one parameter. Well, this is what happens with statistics. Sometimes you find false positives where something's different, appears to be different when it's really not, or it really isn't any physiological thing. Yeah, you might have actually found these differences, but it had nothing to do with treatment. Again, kind of to emphasize that point, this is why good research always has controls.
And the numbers become important too, don't they? Because you were looking at 20 horses in each group. If you were looking at 5 horses, then the potential is that there might have been 5 that created that significant difference at week 4, where it showed that the supplemented group had worse parameters. But if they were the only 5 that you had, just by fluky chance, that difference might have been a lot bigger.
The other problem you get into with really small numbers is sometimes those starting values may be different, or there might be, the day 0 values for the control group versus the treated group might be just enough difference at that starting value that it carries on throughout the rest of the study. Yeah, and it can give you some false readings where when you get 20 horses per treatment group, you're going to get a lot of variation there, but it really tightens up your study in terms of the power of the study to detect differences. And again, thank goodness for Black River for allowing us to use their horses, because very few researchers would have access to a place like this with this type of horses where you could do that study. So we are very blessed that they were available. I am blessed that Renee had worked there and I get to work with Renee. I'm the spoiled one of this whole thing. So yeah.
Sorry, Renee, you'll laugh because I've got a question written down here in front of me. How did one farm have so many lame horses? But you've explained it beautifully and it all makes sense now. But when I was reading the paper, I'm thinking, what is this farm?
On average, I think in this group, we were looking at horses that are about like 18. They're not young. A lot of people consider them past the prime. At summer camp, we hear 18 and we're like, he's got 15 more years to go. Yeah, right. Exactly. No, we've had horses work like well into their 30s. And kind of like what you were saying earlier too, is like it kind of like keeps them young a little bit. It's usually once we like have to make the decision that like the horses have to be retired, like they can't do anything anymore. That's when we like see them get really old usually.
No, I agree.
But it's just they're just not spring chickens anymore.
Hey, you're still here. Well done. That was a lot to take in, and there is a lot more to come, so keep an eye out for part 2 of this 2-part series where we wrap up our discussions on the research and then look in detail at what best practice management for joint health actually looks like. And spoiler alert, proper nutrition is a huge part of building and maintaining healthy joints over your horse's lifetime. So to get a head start on lifetime joint health, head on over to myhappy.horse and download our virtual equine nutritionist app. The My Happy Horse app will make sure your horse's foundational nutrition is balanced so they have all the nutrients they need for healthy joints. Thanks so much for listening, and we will catch you soon for part 2 of this series.